This is the Coronavirus Daily Briefing for Friday, March 27th, 2020. I'm Brian McCullough. The Prime Minister of Britain has tested positive for COVID-19. Why there is a shortage of eggs at the moment. Med school students might be getting a field promotion to join the front lines. The obscure plan that might mean the US Postal Service will have a big role in keeping the country going in coming months. The two current vaccine development tracks. And running the numbers at this moment in time. How many cases should we expect and how many deaths? We're number one, unfortunately. At the time of this writing, the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in the United States is more than 85,000, which means that we have more cases than Italy, more cases than China, which has, of course, 3 times the U.S. population. The U.S. has the most number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 right now in the world. New York State saw the number of hospitalized patients increase by 40% in a single day yesterday. There are now a total of 5,327 patients hospitalized, of whom 1,290 are in intensive care. And those are the numbers that we need to be watching for the next week. New York City has also seen a total of 385 people die of COVID-19 at this point. On Tuesday night, emergency medical services in New York City received 6,406 911 calls. That was the highest volume of emergency calls in a 24-hour period ever for the city, surpassing the total recorded on September 11th, 2001. The mayor of Los Angeles and the governor of Louisiana are warning that their localities are on the same track as New York in terms of expected number of cases. Michigan, which only had 350 cases a week ago, now has more than 3,000. This is a tweet from the former head of the FDA under President Trump, Scott Gottlieb, quote, "I'm worried about emerging situations in New Orleans, Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, among others. In China, no province outside of Hubei ever had more than 1,500 cases. In the U.S., 11 states have already hit that total. Our epidemic is likely to be national in scope," end quote. The hospital ship USNS Comfort is scheduled to arrive at Manhattan's Pier 90 on Monday, 3 weeks earlier than expected, in order to increase the hospital bed capacity in New York City hospitals. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he has tested positive for COVID-19. Johnson said in a tweet that he has, quote, "developed mild symptoms and is self-isolating. Quote, but I will continue to lead the government's response via video conference as we fight this virus," he said, end quote. More than 100 hospital workers in Boston have tested positive for COVID-19. In Spain, 10% of that country's 64,000 cases are healthcare workers, so 6,400 doctors and nurses in Spain are currently infected. In Italy, the average number of casualties per day since March 11th has been 463 people. In Italy, during World War II, the average number of casualties per day was only 338. Australia is activating its military to enforce isolation orders as the number of confirmed cases in that country has surpassed 3,000. Singapore has criminalized the act of standing close to someone. Intentionally standing or sitting close to someone in public is now a crime punishable by 6 months in jail or a $7,000 fine. Building off of something we picked up on yesterday, quoting the Washington Post, a Detroit area health system has developed a contingency plan to deny ventilators and intensive care treatments to coronavirus patients with a poor chance of surviving, including those with some pre-existing medical conditions. Details of the plan were listed on a draft letter from Henry Ford Health Systems to families. The letter circulated on social media late on Thursday, although the company later clarified that it is not yet needed to implement the policy. Quote, "With a pandemic, we must be prepared for the worst case," the health system said on Twitter. "With collective wisdom from our industry, we crafted a policy to provide guidance for making difficult patient care decisions. We hope never to have to apply them. We will always utilize every resource to care for our patients," end quote. Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz said yesterday that that state's youngest COVID patient is a 5-month-old. If you think you've noticed a shortage of eggs available for your stress baking, you're not imagining it. Apparently, egg sales in the U.S. were up 44% last week, and egg prices are up 180% in just a month, quoting the Washington Post. Experts say this is an on-shelf shortage. that there are enough eggs in the works. But if Americans, now cooped up and stress baking for their families, continue to markedly change their cooking behaviors, American egg producers will have to grow their flocks, and that takes time. It takes 22 weeks for a chick to become a laying hen, end quote. Mexican protesters have shut down a U.S. southern border crossing amid fears that American travelers will spread the coronavirus to that country. This quote comes from the BBC. Residents in Sonora, south of the U.S. state of Arizona, have promised to block traffic into Mexico for a second day after closing a checkpoint for hours on Wednesday. They wore face masks and held signs telling Americans to stay home. Mexico has fewer than 500 confirmed COVID-19 cases, and the U.S. is over 85,000. The border is supposed to be closed to all except essential business, but protesters said there has been little enforcement and no testing by authorities. The blockade was led by members of the group Sonorans for Health and Life, which called for medical testing to be done on anyone who crosses from the U.S. into Mexico, end quote. And finally, anecdotal evidence from Washington state that cases there might be leveling off. Quoting the Washington Post, at Evergreen Health Medical Center, 2 miles from the shuttered Life Care nursing home where 35 patient deaths were linked to the virus, officials say their rate of new COVID-19 cases has remained steady for 2 weeks, leveling off at a trickle. On some days, doctors here see just 1 new case and haven't seen more than 4 in a single day since mid-March. Few need admission to the intensive care unit, which is now half full, 2 weeks after overflow necessitated transfers to nearby hospitals. Quote, we don't know if this last 2 weeks has been a calm before the storm or if the social distancing and all those things that are being practiced are working, said Evergreen Health CEO Jeff Tomlin, whose hospital has handled 40 of Washington state's more than 130 virus-related deaths. He said the hospital is no longer overwhelmed, though it still lacks needed supplies, end quote. As we covered yesterday, New York area hospitals are struggling to cope with the influx of COVID-19 patients, and now New York area medical schools are planning early graduations to allow students to join the front lines months ahead of the usual July 1st starting date. Brief 19, a coronavirus news website run by several doctors, reports that the NYU Grossman School of Medicine has offered students what is, in effect, a field promotion. Quoting from Brief 19, a blanket invitation permitting eligible students to graduate early and begin working as soon as April was offered to the soon-to-be graduates this afternoon. This is thought to be the first time in modern American history that such an offer has been made, and it comes as New York City finds itself in the throes of a massive coronavirus crisis. In an email obtained by Brief 19, the deans of the storied medical school announced that students who elect to graduate early would be fully compensated. The policy applies to students preparing to enter all fields of medicine, not only emergency medicine or internal medicine, and is aimed at relieving frontline providers who have been forced to work overtime to keep up with demand. Quote, I'm nervous, humbled, and grateful to be given the opportunity to help my friends and colleagues in any way that I can. I'm proud of my classmates for the effort they've shown going above and beyond in responding to an unprecedented health emergency, a graduating student told Brief 19 Tuesday evening after reading the email, end quote. The students, again, from any field of medicine, would be permitted to graduate early if they've met all graduation requirements and, according to an email sent to the deans, quote, voluntarily agree to work as an MD in our internal medicine or emergency medicine departments beginning in April, end quote. Other medical schools in the area are considering similar actions. Talking Points memo reports that the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai may allow students to graduate as soon as April 14. Neither snow nor rain, nor heat, nor pandemic, I suppose. In addition to continuing to work as we all stay home and order more items online instead of in stores, it turns out that the US Postal Service might have an even bigger role to play in the coming months. Dating back to the Cold War, the USPS has been an integral part of disaster-related preparedness plans. During the Cold War, it would have fallen on postal workers to collect and distribute safety notification cards among survivors following a nuclear attack, and mail trucks would have been converted into emergency casualty carriers. In the modern era, the Postal Service's role was reworked to respond to potential biological threats. As outlined in the Obama-era Executive Order 13527, Medical Countermeasures Following a Biological Attack, quote, "It would fall to the Postal Service to be the first-line responders to a widespread biological terror incident, think an anthrax attack, where the postal office shows up at your door with Cipro. Those plans could potentially be dusted off to help respond to a disease epidemic or pandemic," end quote. In this case, postal workers could be delivering COVID-19 vaccines door to door. Known as the Postal Plan or Postal Option, the Obama order states, quote, "The task for the USPS is to deploy USPS carrier volunteers to deliver antibiotics to residents at the outset of a catastrophic incident using the inherent efficiency of the USPS infrastructure," end quote. Quoting Wired, "As the Department of Homeland Security has identified in its planning, the Postal Service is, after all, the only government agency with the built-in staff and logistical capacity to knock on every residential door in a given community in a single day, a task that, by definition, its 600,000 employees perform in most cities and towns in the country 6 days a week," end quote. The Postal Plan was first developed as part of post-9/11 worst-case scenario planning during the Bush administration, and then codified during the early Obama years, with tests being conducted in several cities using mail carrier volunteers in 2004, 2006, and 2008. Were it to be enacted now, every USPS employee volunteer would undergo a medical test and then be outfitted with N95 disposable respirators or masks, protective nitrile gloves, and disposable clothing, and accompanied by a law enforcement escort vehicle or the National Guard. USPS would suspend regular delivery in the targeted location, and residents said locations would not be informed ahead of time in order to, quote, "limit any panic or security risk to those distributing the medicines," end quote. Wired notes a few potential issues with carrying out this plan in our current climate. Paramount among them is the shortage of personal protective equipment, which would be required for all USPS employee volunteers. Additionally, USPS notes it would need to overstaff for this medical countermeasure program because, quote, "the USPS will recruit a greater number of employee volunteers than the number of delivery assignments required during detailed delivery planning to mitigate staffing shortfalls among employee volunteers," end quote. And finally, Congress is concerned that the decrease in mail during the pandemic could bankrupt the USPS by June, meaning, at the very least, less employees on hand to volunteer if a postal plan needs to be enacted. Whatever happens, as Wired points out, this is just one more reason to be extra nice to your mail carrier right now. If you've been listening every day, then you know that we've been trying to share hopeful news along with all the frightening stuff. And so we've been hunting around for all the news about vaccine research that we can find. There was an amazing piece in The Atlantic earlier this week outlining what the next few months could look like in the U.S., and I encourage you to read that whole thing because it's amazing and it outlines in detail a lot of the things we've been talking about. But right now, I just wanted to pull out these couple of paragraphs about the vaccine development that is going on around the world because I hadn't heard about these specific details before. The most encouraging vaccine developments are happening on two different tracks. Though in terms of a timeline for having a vaccine ready for all of us to use, the end result might be the same that experts have been telling us all along. Quote, "If this were a flu pandemic, this would all be easier. The world is experienced at making flu vaccines and does so every year. But there are no existing vaccines for coronaviruses. Until now, these viruses seem to cause diseases that were mild or rare. So researchers must start from scratch. The first steps have been impressively quick. Last Monday, a possible vaccine created by Moderna and the National Institutes of Health went into early clinical testing. That marks a 63-day gap between scientists sequencing the virus's genes for the first time and doctors injecting a vaccine candidate into a person's arm. It's overwhelmingly the world record, Dr. Anthony Fauci said. But it's also the fastest step among many subsequent slow ones. The initial trial will simply tell researchers if the vaccine seems safe and if it can actually mobilize the immune system. Researchers will then need to check that it actually prevents infection from COVID-19. They'll need to do animal tests and large-scale trials to ensure that the vaccine doesn't cause severe side effects. They'll need to work out what dose is required, how many shots people need, if the vaccine works in elderly people, and if it requires other chemicals to boost its effectiveness. Even if it works, they don't have an easy way to manufacture it at a massive scale, said Seth Berkley of Gavi. That's because Moderna is using a new approach to vaccination. Existing vaccines work by providing the body with inactivated or fragmented viruses, allowing the immune system to prep its defenses ahead of time. By contrast, Moderna's vaccine comprises a sliver of COVID-19's genetic material, its RNA. The idea is that the body can use this sliver to build its own viral fragments, which would then form the basis of the immune system's preparations. This approach works in animals, but is unproven in humans. By contrast, French scientists are trying to modify the existing measles vaccine using fragments of the new coronavirus. Quote, the advantage of that is that if we needed hundreds of doses tomorrow, a lot of plants in the world know how to do it, Berkley said. No matter which strategy is faster, Berkley and others still estimate that it will take 12 to 18 months to develop a proven vaccine, and then longer still to make it, ship it, and inject it into people's arms, end quote. Life feels more stressful these days. No kidding. Stores are empty, travel is on pause, work is uncertain. With social distancing now, we need support more than ever. Talkspace Online Therapy gives you the support you deserve on a schedule that works for you. Talkspace lets you match with a licensed therapist from the safety of your home. Get 24/7 messaging across any device and hear back daily. 1 month on Talkspace costs about the same as a single in-person therapy session, but with that unlimited messaging access I just mentioned and daily engagement. No need to travel for support or wait for relief. Talkspace therapists have experience treating a range of issues, including depression, anxiety, substance abuse, trauma, relationship issues, food and eating, and more. We all need to talk through life's challenges, and Talkspace offers the support we deserve at a price we can afford. Match with your perfect therapist and get $100 off your first month with promo code BRIEFING. Sign up at Talkspace.com or download the app. Don't forget to use the promo code BRIEFING for $100 off your first month. Obviously, for all our sakes, we need to avoid crowds in any way we can right now. But what if you need to go to the post office? What if you need postage to send out letters and packages? Don't worry, Stamps.com is here to help. Anything you can do at the post office, you can do at Stamps.com. Print postage on demand and skip those lines and crowds at the post office. Stamps.com brings all the services of the US Postal Service right to your computer in the safety and comfort of your own home, office, or anywhere else you're hunkering down right now. Whether you're a small business sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, or you're just working from home and need to mail stuff, Stamps.com can handle it all with ease. Simply use your computer to print official US postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send it. Once your mail is ready, just leave it for your mail carrier, schedule a free package pickup, or drop it in a mailbox. No human contact required. It's that simple. Right now, our listeners get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in briefing. That's Stamps.com, enter briefing. Stay safe, my friends. The absence of a coordinated federal approach to securing key medical supplies is causing medical facilities and states to compete against each other, driving up prices and creating a zip code lottery where some regions are receiving new supplies of masks and ventilators while others remain in dire need. Quoting from the Washington Post, the market for medical supplies has descended into chaos, according to state officials and healthcare leaders. They are begging the federal government to use a wartime law to bring order and ensure the United States has the gear it needs to battle the coronavirus. So far, the Trump administration has declined, end quote. New York State reports it has been unable to buy most of the 30,000 ventilators it projects it will need to cope with the curve of the outbreak. Governor Andrew Cuomo has become one of a chorus of governors, including Illinois' J.B. Pritzker, asking the Trump administration to use the Defense Production Act to centralize the procurement of essential equipment and supplies, a move the administration has yet to make. Quoting again from the Post, although governors and hospital leaders welcome the many U.S. companies stepping forward to make masks and ventilators, they fear the voluntary efforts will be too scattershot without federal coordination. President Trump and his trade advisor Peter Navarro have repeatedly said they don't need to force companies to produce under the Defense Production Act because so many manufacturers are volunteering to make medical supplies. Trump seemed to acknowledge the chaos on Tuesday, however, calling the world market for masks and ventilators crazy in a tweet, and adding that it was, quote, not easy to acquire them, end quote. There are extraordinary but competing efforts underway to procure needed supplies as states deal with increasing hospitalization numbers. Illinois' Governor Pritzker reported that one ventilator company told him he was competing against FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to acquire the devices. In another instance, he was told he was competing against orders from other countries. All this competition is driving up prices. According to the Post, quote, Premier, a healthcare company that purchases equipment and supplies for 4,000 acute care hospitals, used to pay about 30 cents for an N95 mask, but is now seeing prices between $3 and $15 per mask, end quote. There are some bright spots amid the chaos as companies respond to pressure from the Trump administration to voluntarily assist in efforts to produce critical supplies. General Motors says it will help ventilator maker Ventec increase production, and clothing manufacturer Hanes is making material to be processed into masks, not N95 masks, but masks hopefully good enough to be used in healthcare settings, according to the FDA. The website 538 has been publishing a weekly survey where it asks infectious disease researchers about the trajectory of the coronavirus and then combining their responses to create what it calls a consensus forecast. The latest survey was conducted on March 23rd and 24th, and the consensus forecast predicts there will be around 117,000 cases reported in the United States by Sunday, March 29th, 2 days from now, which is a substantial increase from the consensus forecast from last week of only 19,000. The forecast estimates 246,000 deaths will occur in 2020, but the range of that consensus is pulled from responses that span from 36,000 deaths to 1.1 million. The expert consensus for the number of actual COVID-19 infections in the U.S. on Monday, so not confirmed cases, but people actually infected, whether tested or not, was 362,000. Overall, the consensus among experts was that only 9% of all cases have currently been reported. The experts think we'll see peak hospitalizations in May, and that 37 of the 50 U.S. states will be reporting more than 100 cases by Sunday. Despite what the consensus numbers state, there was still a wide range given by respondents between best case, worst case, and most likely scenarios for each question. Justin Lessler, one of the respondents and an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins University, told 538 that we may be able to fall closer to the best case scenario if we, quote, adhere to guidance around social distancing, take all symptoms seriously, and self-isolate at the first sign of a potential infection, end quote. So I just read you all those numbers, but, sometimes I worry that on this show, when we spew a bunch of numbers, they can tend to just run together in your ears. So let's end today and this week by backing up with some actual tangible numbers that you could probably wrap your mind around. At the time of this recording, the U.S. has 85,000 cases of COVID-19 confirmed. We will no doubt pass 100,000 confirmed cases this weekend, or maybe even later today. So let's use that nice round number of 100,000 Americans infected. As of right now, the case fatality rate in the U.S. is between 1.8 and 3.4. So again, using that round number of 100,000, if we reached 100,000 cases and stopped on a dime and never saw another case, we can expect between 1,800 and 3,400 Americans to die of the disease in the coming weeks. In fact, 1,304 Americans have already died. And even for those numbers to remain in the range I just read, that assumes intensive care units are not overwhelmed. If they are, which they are likely to be starting around right now, then we have to look at the numbers from Italy and China when that has happened there. And those numbers imply a death rate of 4.9 to 11.2. That means if we froze everything in place right now, 11,000 Americans could die within a few weeks' time. The number of cases in the U.S. has gone up 6 times just this past week. Do you really think the numbers of cases are going to magically slow down next week? That's unlikely. A week from today, we will likely be significantly over 200,000 cases, if not much more. So run those numbers that I just ran again for 200,000 cases, for 500,000, for 1 million. Unless some miracle happens in the coming weeks, in the coming months at the outside, we could see more Americans die from COVID-19 than we saw die in the entire Vietnam War. The time for self-delusion is probably, sadly, over. Heads up, everybody. We are now posting the show to YouTube every day. The very last link in the show notes is a link to the YouTube channel. If you prefer, you can catch these updates every day over there. If we get 100 subscribers, then we can create our own custom URL so that people can find the channel easier. So even if you don't listen on YouTube, please do us a favor and hit the link and subscribe on YouTube so we can hit that 100 subscriber number. We might have an extra episode this weekend, but that's still to be determined at the moment. Watch your podcast feed just in case. Be well, everyone.